What up, everybody? Welcome to the channel. If you're new, don't be. Go ahead and click that subscribe button to be a part of the Witness Gang, to join the Witness Nation. And let's get into this, shall we? Hello, you guys, and welcome to the channel. If you're new, don't be.
I'm Whitney. Keep it cute, get the boot.
Your girl, as whack as she is in all her glory, was in the New York Times. All right, you guys, welcome back. Good evening. I know it's super late, but I try my very best to keep my word for you guys. I told y'all when it came in, as soon as it came in, I would get to you guys. And I know it's late, but I want to just go ahead and get it out there. So those that are up late, those that are, working late or getting up early in the morning or what have you, you have this to reflect upon. Okay. So without further ado, I don't want to hold you guys. Okay. So let's go ahead and get into everything. Okay. First and foremost, welcome. Good evening. I pray you guys are having a super, super blessed evening, to say the utmost least. Welcome. Okay. If you guys are tuning in live, or if you guys are catching the replay, welcome. Make sure that you put your city and or state in the chat so I know where you guys are tuning in from. Okay. Now, lastly, but also make sure that you guys keep it cute. Okay, so you won't get the boot, all right, which I think is pretty late. So I don't think you guys are going to be in here acting a donkey in any kind of way, okay? But not for nothing. Make sure that you guys subscribe to the channel if you have not done so already. Like this video and share this video if you care, okay? And not necessarily if you care, but share it if, hey, Shawty, share it if you want to get the information out there to somebody else, and you go ahead and click the link to become a member. It should be located in the description box. Okay, all right, okay. And if you would like to send a donation, this is where you can. Okay, I'm trying to get on into it if you guys haven't noticed, because I want you guys to be able to get the information in which you came here for. Okay. But before I get into everything in pertaining to the docket, hey, Shawty. Hey. Good evening, honey bunches. Thank you for waiting for me on me. If I mean, it's pretty late. I get it. All right, you guys. Let's go ahead and get into everything. Let me update this part right here. Hold on, y'all. It's response. Okay. All right. So I just had to update everything for those that are coming in. All right. Okay. So if you guys aren't familiar, oh, wait. First and foremost, let me just do this disclaimer, please. All right. This platform discusses any and all information that has been made known to the public in any way. I am not a journalist. I am a commentator. Okay. The information is all alleged, but the commentary is very real. And like I say, when I do the disclaimer in regards to what we're talking about, this is no alleged. Okay, this is all court documents that you can find yourself. Okay, but not for nothing. Just to get everybody abreast to what's going on while I am getting the document up. Okay, so for those that aren't aware of what's going on, it's two things that are going on. Okay, because I've been seeing a lot of people kind of confused as to like what's going on, right? Okay, so the thing is this, all right? Two different things going on. One is the overall process of the appeal. Okay, Bonjean initiated that. Okay, she should as a defense attorney. Okay, so she started that, she pressed that off, and she, submitted her in, which had the internet going crazy with these stupid ass text messages, right? Okay, they got everybody distracted to everything that was going on, the real stuff that she was putting out there that was stupid and fraudulent and ridiculous, right? But anyways, so then we go on and we hear about the government responded and, oh man, shut everything down. They had 104 pages or what have you. So now, which brings us to today, which is the 4th. Okay, before all this was done, which I think I told you guys on the 29th, Bojangles, which I call her Bojangles, her name is Jennifer Bonjean, she submitted, slid on in there, like sliding into somebody's DMs. She slid a motion to push the sentencing of R. Kelly, which is scheduled May 4th, back after August 1st, which is his Illinois trial. Okay. So what transpired on today, which I read to you guys earlier in the other R. Kelly Tales, is that one, the government responded to her and was like, girl, bye, because her claims were two different things. One was against his constitutional right, and then two was basically she's booking busy and she really want to give him enough time to be able to give her attention and all that stuff like that. Okay, well, the government came back and was like, girl, bye, first and foremost, you can seal a lot of this information to where it doesn't hinder his constitutional right. And then for two, girl, this is what we do. We're professionals, we're attorneys, and we know this is what it is. Basically, if you can't stand the heat, get your ass out the kitchen. Okay, so that was the government's response. You can look that up here on Whitney D TV. I think it's R. Kelly Tales number 30. one, if I'm not mistaken, right? So then the second part in which I was telling you about what we were waiting on today. Oh, and in regards to that particular response to that, because they were opposed of getting the sentencing pushed back. We have the seventh now, to where we can wait to hear the defense rebuttal in regards to them being opposed of the sentencing being pushed back. Okay, so now we go back to the second thing, which is the appeal process. Okay, so Bone Jean went, the government went, and then it was up to Bone Jean to respond. That brings us to today. Okay, just to get everybody abreast and caught up to what's going on now. Okay, I'm about to share my screen because it is 10:25 here in Texas. I'm not sure what time it is in New York. I'm thinking they're ahead of us, if I'm not mistaken. So it should be like what, 11:25 there, what have you. So she got it right in on the cusp of it's being kind of like not necessarily too late, but time for her to like get everything in before midnight, right? So which brings us to what's going on today. Okay, and what's going on today, what we're going to read is Bone Jangles response in regards to the government. Okay, so this is what we have on the screen, as you guys can see, and I'm making it extra big for the people in the back that are trying to read aloud or along with myself. Okay, as you guys see, this is the date. I mean, today. Okay, I mean, it literally got submitted. I've been watching the docket just so I can keep you guys abreast. I'm up anyways, so I wanted to be able to just watch that. Okay, so here it is. Okay, so let's go ahead and read this together. And it's only 22 pages, so it is what it is. It's going to be a nice little quick read. Defendant Robert Kelly's reply in response to the government's memorandum of law in opposition to the defendant's motion for a judgment of acquittal. Okay, so they're going to actually respond to both the acquittal as well as the new trial. That's why it's 22 pages, maybe 10 per motion. We don't know. We're going to see. Okay, hopefully they stayed on topic this go round. Okay, all right, so this is the table of contents. First pages is going to be the table of authorities. And then she goes on into the argument, which is the government failed to prove defendant guilty of the defense of racketeering count one. Oh my God, she's still on this. Okay, so here, as we see what we're going to be reading in regards to everything, basically she's just going over again what we already know. Oh, and that's the conclusion. Okay, so that's going to be all the pages. So she's actually going against the count one about everything. Okay, so just count one, she came back to rebuttal against. Okay, and that looked like that'll be it. All right, so let's get into it and see exactly what Bone Jangles had to say. Government failed to prove defendant guilty of the offense of racketeering count one. It goes on to say, where there was no common purpose to carry out a fraudulent course of conduct, the government did not establish an enterprise. The government concedes that its evidence did not prove that defendants' employees share a common purpose of criminality, but contends that to demonstrate a RICO enterprise, it was only required to show that the defendant's employees shared a common purpose to promote his music and meet his personal needs. Okay. Government response at 49. Okay. Despite authority to the contrary, the government insists that to prove a RICO enterprise, the members of the enterprise need not have a connection to any unlawful conduct. Government response at 50. According to the government, so long as the persons associated in fact share a common purpose, a RICO enterprise may exist, even if those persons do not have a common understanding that the purpose of the enterprise is to carry out illegal or fraudulent conduct. Under the government's theory, an enterprise exists when any individual is engaged in a pattern of unlawful conduct, racketeering activities, and merely uses his employees to unwittingly facilitate that conduct. The government's argument is belied by the law and common sense. At the outset, the government is unable to to provide a single case that supports its expansive view of a RICO enterprise, nor is it able to identify any factuality, factually similar authority. Yeah, they actually did. Wasn't she making a joke about how all the case laws that they were using and child girl bye. Um, Instead, the government repeats to reframe that an enterprise may constitute a legal entity, but this point is not in dispute. An enterprise can be either a formal or informal organization that conducts purely illegal activity or conducts largely legal activity. Any union or group of individuals associated, in fact, can constitute an enterprise. This case law as written. However, to sustain a charge of RICO, the members of the enterprise must share a purpose of carrying out some course of unlawful conduct. Okay, and you'll see this case law in regards to right here. Okay. If this was not the case, a RICO enterprise could be established by one bad actor using his employees, his neighbors, or even his friends to unwittingly facilitate that misconduct. The farmers, good God. Sorry, y'all. Hopefully, it didn't make me go mute. Let me just check. Okay. All right. Sorry, y'all. Let me move. Okay. Sorry, y'all. I have this filter over my mic and it just fell. Okay, let me just move it out the way. Sorry, y'all. I'm just moving stuff. um Framers of the RICO statute did not intend this absurd result, and courts have not hesitated to reject this expansive view of RICO enterprise. Strangely, the government cites Moss versus BMO Harris Bank and A, which is this particular case law, to support its argument, but Moss strongly supports defendant's position. The plaintiff brought a putative class action against First Premier Bank, FPB, alleging RICO violations. Specifically, the plaintiff charged that FPB, a formal legal entity, belonged to the Automatic Clearing House, ACH network, a payment processing system that processed unlawful ACH transactions on behalf of payday lenders. The plaintiff argued interior alia that the ACH network constituted an enterprise consisting of originators, various depository financial institutions that receive ACH transactions instructions, ACH operators, and third-party service providers, all of which shared the common lawful purpose of facilitating batch processing of electronic payments for and between participating depository financial institutions. Girl, okay. The court concluded that the ACH network described by plaintiff did not constitute an enterprise for RICO purposes. The court held that to satisfy the first prong of the Boyd test, the participants in an association, in fact, enterprise, must share a common purpose to engage in a particular fraudulent course of conduct and work together to achieve such purposes. Emphasis in the original, okay? And then this particular case law, as you see, okay, goes on to say the court dismissed plaintiff's 1962A claim, finding that plaintiff's failure to plead an association, in fact, enterprise that shared a wrongful intent to violate RICO was fatal to the claim. And in this particular case law, okay, all the way here, affirming, blah, blah, blah. First Nationwide Bank versus these particular legit funding and this particular case law. Okay, goes on to say the Moss Court expressly rejected the plaintiff's enterprise theory, finding it impulsively that impulsive implausible that all of the institutions that allegedly made up the enterprise possess the unlawful intent required to transform that cooperative into a association, in fact, enterprise for RICO purposes. And then you see this particular case law, y'all. If it's some kind of like glitching or whatever the case may be, I do apologize. It's raining here, and it's real bad. Hey, Monica, sis. Good night, everyone. Hey, good night. Okay, let me keep reading. Okay, this particular case law goes on. Okay, critically, the plaintiff in Moss argued that the defendant bank shared a common purpose of the ACH network and used the ACH network to originate lawful and legitimate transactions, but also used its role within the ACH network to participate in the collection of unlawful debts, relying on until supra. I don't know. Y'all see it. The Moss Court observed that at best, the defendant used a legitimate network to advance its own illegitimate business interests, and that the alleged illicit ACH transactions did not render the ACH network a RICO enterprise, absent a common purpose among the other network participants to violate RICO. Girl, she just used a lot of case law to take up a few pages. Like, girl. And I'm confused because I don't even know why she submitted the fact of the matter that she's going to need more pages, because it's only 22 pages. But I digress. The Moss Court's logic applies with full force here. The government's evidence showed that the defendant's so-called inner circle, more ample described as his employees, worked to promote defendant's music and brand, a legitimate enterprise at best. The government's evidence showed that the defendant used his role within his music-driven collective to participate in private sexual misconduct, as in Moss. Defendant's use of his otherwise legitimate music business to advance his illegal, allegedly illegitimate sexual needs does not render defendant's business organization a RICO enterprise, absent a common purpose among his employees to violate RICO. Thus, the government's RICO enterprise theory fails. That's not true, because she proved the point. He was using his music and everything else to cover up the fact of the illegitimate, the illegal things that he was doing. What is she talking about? That's exactly, you're an idiot, ma'am. You're an idiot. Courts have rejected the government's expansive theory of a RICO enterprise because it would extend RICO liability to a vast marketplace based on one bad actor's mere association with the other members of the collective. Okay, this particular case law. By way of example, under the government's theory, both Fox News and NBC News constitute RICO enterprises because of the bad conduct of Roger Ailes and Matt Lauer. I'm sorry, y'all. Okay. Respectfully, Roger Ailes, the former CEO of Fox News, allegedly sexually harassed, inappropriately touched, and exposed himself to women, some as young as 16 years old, while working at Fox News. Under the government's expansive interpretation of enterprise, Fox News and its employees who worked for Ailes, his associates, his assistants, his secretaries, his drivers, etc., constitute an enterprise for RICO purposes because they presumably shared a common purpose to promote Fox News and meet the needs of its CEO. Okay. By the government's logic, if Allie's assistants carried out tasks such as scheduling appointments, arranging transportation, or making lunch reservations for Allie's and women he harassed or assaulted, those assistants constitute members of a RICO enterprise, irrespective of their knowing involvement in L's unlawful conduct. The same can be said for Matt Lauer, former NBC News anchor who was accused of repeatedly harassing and assaulting his female colleagues, sometimes while traveling for work, consistent with the government's theory. Many of Laura's assistants, handlers, drivers would qualify as members of an enterprise for RICO purposes if, in the course of their duties, they facilitated Laura's illegal sexual conduct. Even unwittingly, of course, the government has shown no willingness to use its aggressive RICO theory against powerful white men. But the fact remains that if it's RICO enterprise theory, in this case, is sanctioned, the government will have virtually unlimited power to charge a single bad actor with RICO. Girl, you are so deflective. And she is trying so bad to put her cape on for this black man. Girl, baby, the child, like, girl, bye. Okay, why not charge the other white man? Oh my God, it's a black thing. Girl, bye. We don't care about his black ass. Okay, lock him up. In sum, the government concedes that it failed to establish an enterprise when it offered no evidence that defendants' various employees over the course of 2 decades engaged in coordinated activity to jointly achieve a common fraudulent purpose. Yes, they did, girl. What are you talking about? See, instead of you wasting your time doing this, you should have read up on those 5,000 pieces of document, because yes, they did. They literally printed out pages of his number with his name on it and tore it off in little bitty pieces, and they did this as a unit. What are you talking about? Each one of them had their roles to do what they needed to do. Get tickets. Girl, you're an idiot. She's an idiot. She's an idiot. Okay, anyways, as summarized by the government in its opposition papers, the evidence at trial showed only that defendants' employees generally engaged in a variety of tasks that supported defendants' relationship, not that they performed activities with the purpose of supporting illegal conduct. Yes, they did. Because the government failed to prove that the members of defendants' so-called inner circle act jointly to achieve a common fraudulent or illegal scheme, this court must acquit defendant of RICO. Girl, that is not happening. Where my gavel? I'm happy. Girl, get your ass out of here. Girl, good day to you. Hold on. Girl, this is why y'all, sorry, and y'all know I'll be honest, this is not a win for the defense. Girl, good day. Get the stepping. Girl, get your behind up out of here. Like, for real, Felicia. Girl, bye. Anyways, let me continue. This lady is dingy. This lady is dingy. Where am I at? Yeah, this lady is dingy. Okay. Okay. B, the government's evidence of an enterprise distinct from the defendant was wanting. The government insists that its proofs satisfy the person enterprise rule because the enterprise consisted of more than the defendant. The government's summary conclusions are not backed up by the evidence. Yes, it was. The government argues that the purpose of the enterprise was to promote defendant, his music, and his brand, and to ensure that his needs were met. Illogically, the government argues that the enterprise was distinct from the defendant, but fails to identify evidence to support this contingent. And they did. Frankly, the government seems to concede that defendant is the enterprise and that the enterprise simply does not exist without him, which explains why it fails to charge even one other person in connection with the alleged vast RICO enterprise. Actually, okay, well, let me be quiet. The government offers only a feeble response to defendants' discreteness challenge, citing no authority to support its contention or distinguishing the holdings of Riverwoods, this particular case law. Okay, by alleging a RICO enterprise that consists of defendant and his own employees, agents, carrying on his affairs, namely promoting his brand, his music, and even facilitating his sexual needs. The government fails to satisfy the distinctness requirement. Put differently, because the government alleged that defendants' employees associated together for no purpose other than to carry out defendants' needs, including his sexual activity. The employees did not form an enterprise distinct from defendant. Defendant and the alleged enterprise were one and the same. The government failed to prove that the so-called enterprise's activities affected enterprise commerce. What? This lady is an idiot. She's going to lose. Okay? I'm sorry, not trying to be funny, but she's going to lose. Okay? I mean, it's Lord talking all that noise on Twitter, talking about how the government didn't prove anything. You wasn't reading, sis. Like normal. You never read. Bojangles. The government's interstate commerce argument hinges on its theory that the purpose of the RICO enterprise was to promote defendants' music and brand. As argued, supra this RICO enterprise theory fails because there is simply no nexus between this collective of individuals who work to promote defendants' music and a course of fraudulent conduct or the racketeering activity in which the defendant is alleged to have engaged. If defendants' legitimate music collective constituted an enterprise for RICO purposes, the government's argument would be well taken. But for the reasons identified supra, the government cannot prove a RICO enterprise based on individuals associated, in fact, for the purpose of promoting defendants' music. The government's proof did not establish a pattern of racketeering. One, production of sexually explicit material. Racketeering Acts 2, 7, and 10. The government charged defendant with 3 violations of this particular case law for allegedly, 1, videotaping a consensual sex act with 17-year-old Stephanie, videotaping a sex act with 17-year-old Jane in the state of California, where the age of consent is 18, and 3, videotaping a sex act with Yolanda in Illinois before she turned 18 years of age. The government argues that it provided sufficient proof of these case law violations. Because defendant used the minors to take part in sexually explicit conduct for the purpose of producing a visual depiction of that conduct. The government argues that pursuant to the authority in this circuit and others, proof that defendant photographed or videotaped the minor without more is sufficient evidence of a of this particular case law violation, because videotaping the minor alone constitutes use of the minor, okay, in this particular case law. Although it is true that several circuits, including Second Circuit, have held that the use element set forth in this particular case law is satisfied when a defendant intentionally films a minor sexually explicit conduct. Defendant maintains that use requires more than a minor appearing in a photograph or video. To reach a different conclusion would render the remaining terms in the statute persuade, induce, entice, or coerce superfluous. It is a cardinal principle of statutory construction that a statute ought upon a whole to be construed that if it can be prevented, no clause, sentence, or word shall be superfluous or insignificant. This particular case law. If, as the government argues, this particular case law violation is established by nothing more than proving that a defendant photographed or videotape a minor in sexually explicit conduct, the terms persuaded, induced, enticed, or coerced are entirely unnecessary. To accept the Serioso court's interpretation of the word use is to render the remainder of the sentence meaningless, in direct contradiction to principle of statutory construction. To read the statute where each word has significance requires a court to define use as something more than the act of filming, photographing the minor. Defendant acknowledges the authority to the contrary, but maintains that the law is contrary to the intent of framers of the statute. Girl, so basically, you agree with that. Girl, bye. Girl, bye. Girl, bye. Okay, so basically, you're saying we agree with that, but we just saying, we want a little bit more. Girl, shut up. She's an idiot. Y'all be up here singing so high for Bone Jangles, and this lady is just not making any kind of sense. She's okay. Anyways, two, y'all like that rain in the background? Mann Act violations exposure to STD. Racketeering Acts 8 and 12A intent. In keeping with its decorum approach, statutory interpretation, the government argues that even though in charge Mann Act violations based on defendants' violation of state public safety laws prohibiting knowing exposure to STDs, the government denies that it must prove that that defendant arranged the travel of Jane and Faith with the intent to violate those laws. With no authority, the government argues that it was sufficient to show only that one of defendant's motivations in arranging for Jane and Faith to travel to meet him during his music tours was to have sex with them, not to violate the charged offenses. The government simply ignores its obligation to prove a nexus between the transportation and the alleged illegal conduct. This is a reoccurring pattern in the government's prosecution of this case. That is not true. Girl, you did not read. All those case laws that y'all was joking about on Twitter, you clearly didn't read. That was established. And I guarantee you that the judge is going to see that. It was established, you weirdo. This lady is not doing good for R.KELLY. This is going to be kicked out. Mind you, you guys, this is it. After she responds, it's no response from the government. This is it. It's now going to be in the hands of Judge Donnelly. The illegal sexual activity that the government charged are specific offenses presented to the California and New York public health codes. The record is devoid of any evidence that a significant or motivating purpose in arranging for Jane and Faith's travel was to expose them to an STD. Girl, you're an idiot. Because if you know you have an STD and you flew somebody out and they come in, you have sex with them, that's what it is. That's the point of exposure. You know you got it. He knew he had it. He shouldn't be having unprotected sex. That's the difference if he was strapped up. He exposed him to it. What is you talking about? The government devotes 6 pages of its discussion to reviewing the copious amount of testimony it presented in connection with the defendant's alleged conduct of having unprotected sex with Jane and Faith, who never contracted genital herpes in any event. Girl, you are a liar. This lady is crazy. What is she talking about? This lady is batch crazy, y'all. What is she talking about? What is she talking about, y'all? They did contract, and that's the reason why she was putting the freaking transcripts in their testimony, because girl, clearly you didn't read them. So they were trying to be nice and actually let you kind of catch up. Why you trying to be funny and laughing on Twitter with these bum people out there that clearly don't know the trial? So you're looking at like an idiot out here for these people that are rooting you on to be set up for failure. But none of these testimonies demonstrated that the defendant's actions of arranging for Jane and Faith to travel to meet him was motivated by an intent to expose. It did, you idiot, because he was aware that he had it. That's how you get exposed. If I don't have anything, I'm not exposing you to anything. If I have something, I'm exposed. This woman is crazy. The government continues to ignore these salient argument here, namely that it failed to show that defendant was motivated to have Jane and Faith travel to meet him so that he could expose him to an STD, rather than to simply have sex with them. Yeah, you idiot. See, she's contradicting herself. That's exactly right. Yeah, his intent was to have sex with them. But you can't just have unprotected sex with people knowingly that you have an STD. That's the point, you idiot. This woman is crazy. This woman is Looney Tune. She's proven the point. Racketeering Act 8B and 12B. Persuasion, inducement, enticement, or coercion. The government continues to push a narrative it knows to be false, namely that the defendant induced, enticed, coerced, or even persuaded Jane or Faith to travel to meet him in California and New York, respectfully, to engage in illegal sexual conduct. The undisputed evidence showed nothing of the sort. What? In both scenarios, defendant asked Jane and Faith to meet him at his concerts, and they accepted. Both young women were eager to meet the defendant and did not with a clear understanding that it would likely involve sex. Ma'am, are you in? Okay. In regards to Jane Bojangles, it don't matter if she was excited, eager, if she said yes. None of that matters when it's illegal. It don't matter, woman. That's why Zeus is going to get their butt handed to them. You can't sit here and say, well, you signed a contract to where you can't sue us. I can if you break the law. He broke the law. This was a minor when in the case of Jane, and then he broke the law in the case of Faith because he gave her STD without her being aware. As set forth in detail, in the defendant's opening papers, Jane's contemporaneous text messages with her mom show that Jane's mother engineered Jane's relationship with the defendant. The text messages reflect that Jane and her mother communicated incessantly about how Jane could entice defendant into a relationship that Jane's mother hoped would catapult her into stardom. This lady is so deflective. Here we go with these stupid ass text messages that have nothing to do with anything. She's deflecting because her freaking client is a loser. Period. We're not fixing to do this. She has nothing, so she's holding on to these threads of these fake text messages that I done debunked for y'all. These text messages did not come from Azriel's mother. They came from Azriel's phone. Period. Prior to traveling to California, Jane's mother demanded that she continue to text defendant. You better be texting him so you will stay on his mind. Jane dutifully reported to her mother that she had spoken to defendant about flying to California to meet him, and that the defendant told her that she could meet him whenever I tell him. Ma'am, again, and let me say this for the people in the back that's going to run with these stupid text messages again. It does not matter if the parents signed Azriel off. Let me make this very clear to you idiots, okay? It doesn't matter. These text messages doesn't matter. It's illegal. She was still underage. Period. Period. As the government concedes, defendant had no idea that Jane was 17 years old, since Jane and her parents actively misled defendant about her age. That's a lie. Because it was proven on the stand that Azriel got pregnant and that he had a conversation with her saying, I wouldn't mind you having this baby if you wasn't 17. But see, Bojangles didn't have the time to read over the 5,000 transcripts as we did here on YouTube. And so she's steady looking like a butt when she responds. During her trip to California with the defendant, Jane and her mother were in a constant communication. Jane never once complained that she had been enticed or on false pretenses, or that she felt misled. Quite the opposite. The text messages reflect that Jane was having the time of her life and thrilled to be romantically connected to the defendant, which doesn't matter, woman, because she still was underage. And he was aware at a point of time in which he knew Azriel's age. And at that point of time, he did nothing but continue the relationship. Similarly, Faith's testimony on this issue shows the defendant asked her if she wanted to hang out. Faith agreed, and the defendant merely paid for her travel. Again, ma'am, you're deflecting. It doesn't matter if she was gun-ho to going. It doesn't matter if she wanted to have sex with R. Kelly. Where R. Kelly messed up was on his end, just like all these other situations. He had herpes. He exposed her. He did not let her know up front that he had them. It doesn't matter if she jumped on the pole. If he did not let her know, hey, before we do this, he's out of order. Why would she ask him? That don't make sense. She's under the impression that she has nothing to ask. The record is devoid of any evidence of persuasion, enticement, or inducement on the part of the defendant. Y'all can believe that if y'all want to. Faith may have decided to travel and hang out with the defendant because she sought to be near a celebrity. Wow. So basically, groupie. Okay, girl. But this motivation on her part had nothing to do with the defendant's conduct. Defendant's status as a famous R&B singer does not amount to enticement. Notwithstanding the government's argument to contrary, the government suggested that the defendant's act of arranging for Jane's travel is sufficient to demonstrate that he induced her to travel to California because he caused her to travel. The law says otherwise. The Second Circuit has made clear that the terms persuade, induce, entice, and coerce are words of common usage that have plain, ordinary meanings. Okay, in this particular case law, the court distinguishes, sorry, y'all, the thunder. The court distinguishes this conduct from merely asking, which is not sufficient to demonstrate criminality. This particular case law, keeping with its pattern of rewriting statutes, the government suggests that it need only prove that the defendant caused Jane and Faith to travel to meet him to sustain the charge. The government relies on a 1959 case from the Fourth Circuit that interpreted the now defunct version of the Mann Act that has historically used by the government to persecute Black men. Oh my gosh. Who had relationships with white women? Girl. The current iteration of the Mann Act does not contain the cause language like the 1958 version did. Moreover, as discussed in detail, infra harms actually stands for the proposition that the government must provide specific proof of persuasion to sustain its burden. The government's reliance on harms is misplaced. Contrary to the government's claim, it was required to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that defendant persuaded, induced, or enticed Jane to travel to California, not merely asked. The government's evidence was wanting. The court must acquit the defendant of this Mann Act violation and all others. Girl, bye. Good luck with that. The government, New York Penal Law 120.20. The government charged defendant with a violation of the Mann Act as to Faith based on the theory that he committed the offense of reckless endangerment when he had unprotected sex with her in New York without disclosing he suffered from genital herpes. The government again rehashes its excessive herpes testimony, insisting that a reasonable jury could easily conclude from the trial evidence that defendant created a substantial risk of physical injury when he had unprotected sex with Faith. Taking the government's evidence in its best light, it failed to prove that the defendant had sex with Faith. He created substantial risk of physical injury. What? Girl, the STD. Did you not hear all of the stuff that you go through with this STD? Girl, this, okay. Let me finish reading. I want to get this over with because this lady is crazy. First, because Faith was not afflicted with herpes and did not testify that she observed any evidence that defendant had an active infection. The only reasonable inference to draw is that defendant did not have any type of outbreak when he and Faith had sex. Okay, let me make this very clear to you, idiot, bone jangles. Okay, and y'all can grab that voice clip like y'all love to do. Clearly, you didn't do your research thoroughly when it comes to herpes. You can pass the STD without having an outbreak, baby. It's in your bloodstream. Okay? It lies dormant. Okay? So you can get it even with no sign of an outbreak, Mel. So that means nothing. The government insists that this fact is irrelevant, but rather defendant was engaging in unprotected sex while suffering from an active infection or during a period when he had no symptoms is entirely relevant to his state of mind and relevant to the issue of whether he acted recklessly. Surely the government would argue that it is more reckless and the risk of harm is more substantially if a defendant had unprotected sex with Faye during an active outbreak. No, ma'am. It don't matter if it's during. He had it, so he can pass it at any time. Thus, the question of whether Faith was infected with herpes in New York is relevant to the defendant's state of mind and whether he acted with the requisite intent. Furthermore, the government's evidence simply did not prove that there was a substantial risk of death or serious physical injury, as argued at great length in the defendant's opening memorandum of law. The government's herpes expert testified at length about rare complications of herpes that arguably would qualify as serious physical injury. But unless those risks were substantial, the government cannot meet its burden. Yes, it did. Since the risk of serious physical injury associated with herpes is low rather than substantial risk, the government failed to prove reckless endangerment, which is a lie. They proved it with R.KELLY, y'all. Remember, she couldn't walk. Remember how she was in pain and hurting so much so that she couldn't walk? That's substantial, ma'am. You didn't read. New York Public Health Law 2307. For the reasons fleshed out in defendant's opening memorandum, hold on, I'm sorry. New York Public Health Law 2307 is unconstitutional in inter alia. It fails to define, sorry, I had an itch, define infected. While the government and this court assumes that infected means carrying the virus rather than having the ability to transmit it, no authority supports this interpretation. Such an interpretation would lead to arbitrary and discriminatory enforcement as it did in this case. As a reminder, the government can point to no case in which an individual was charged with a violation of this public health law where the accused did not even transmit a disease to the alleged victim. Girl, violations of California health safety law, health safety code 120290. The government argues that it was permitted to charge defendant with a repealed statute and rewrite it so that it would pass constitutional muster. Unsurprisingly, the government has no authority to support its view that it can take up the role of California legislator for unknown reasons. The government relies on a 1978 case out of the Third Circuit that fails to support its claim that it has the authority to charge and prosecute repealed statutes and to further step into the shoes of lawmakers and rewrite statutes to its liking. The government also inexplicable cites this particular case law, which considered whether a certain charge violated the ex post fato. Hope I'm saying that right, y'all. Anywho, clause since the alleged conduct occurred prior to the enactment of the statute. The issue raised here is different. The question before this court is whether the government was permitted to charge a version of the statute that did not exist at the time of the prosecution. The government states, excuse me, the United States Supreme Court answered that question in the negative. The government points this court to no competent authority demonstrating that the antiquated version of the California public health law may be kept alive. As such, the government had no authority to charge and prosecute defendant under a repealed and inoperative statute. Okay. Racketeering Act 5 Mann Act violation, Geronda. The government expresses some confusion over a defendant's interstate commerce argument. To be clear, defendant did expressively argue that purely interstate use of cell phones does not constitute use of a facility of interstate commerce. Defendant did more than vaguely suggest this argument, as the government contends in footnote 28. Defendant cited authority to support the proposition, namely this particular case law, and further acknowledged a Second Circuit case that arguably conflicts with Gonzalez. The issue is properly preserved and presented to this court. If the court would like additional briefing on this issue or the many other raised in defendant's Rule 29 motion, it certainly has the authority to order it. If it wasn't clear enough, defendant argued in the alternative that even if interstate cell phone use does satisfy the Commerce Clause requirement in some circumstances, it did not do so here. The government showed only that Geronda and the defendant sometimes communicated by cell phone. The date and nature of those communications are unknown. Oh, we're really talking about date and natures. Whenever you submitted the text messages of Azriel's alleged mom, when was the time and the nature and all that stuff like that? You just threw that in there and little snippets of everything. Girl, bye. The pot, meat, kettle, okay? The government asked the jury to assume that the defendant induced, persuaded, enticed, or coerced Geronda to engage in prohibited sexual activity during their cell phone communications without providing the communications or even eliciting testimony from Geronda about what the communications reflected. The government routinely attempts to avoid nexus requirements and must be reminded that the government was required to show that defendant used the cell phones to commit the specific prohibited act, namely to induce, persuade, or entice. Geronda engaged in unlawful sexual behavior. The government cannot satisfy that burden by generally showing that defendant and Geronda sometimes communicated by cell phone and that on some unrelated occasion, they engaged in unlawful sexual activity. The law used in those communications, to the extent they existed, is important for determining whether the defendant induced, persuaded, enticed, or coerced, or merely asked Geronda, which would be insufficient to demonstrate criminality. While the government cites some authority to support its contention that interstate commerce can be established by interstate cell phone use, none of the case cited by the government condoned asking a jury to assume the context of those communications, as the government did here in this particular case law. The defendant was charged with a 2242A violation, not a violation under 2242B. The victors the Vickers Court was never faced with the question of whether the government can satisfy its burden of proof without even introducing the communications that it claims constituted persuasion, inducement, or coercion, nor was the Vickers Court faced with an interstate commerce question. Acknowledging the problems with its proof, the government relies on Bloomingfield versus United States case law, as you see, a 60-year-old case out of the Eighth Circuit that interpreted the repealed and outdated Mann Act statute. That aside, Bloomingfield involved a defendant arranging for a prostitute, Miss Tolson, to cross state lines for the purpose of prostitution, where the evidence shown that defendant telephoned Miss Tolferson for a precise purpose of hiring her to cross state lines and engaging in prostitution in exchange for money. It is no surprise that a jury concluded that the defendant used the telephone to induce Miss Tolferson across state lines for prostitution. In contrast, here, Geronda testified that she had a sexual relationship with the defendant that was carried out entirely in the state of Illinois. She did not describe herself as a prostitute and admitted that she went to parties at defendant's home, hung out there for extended periods of time, and even went to the defendant's home when he was not there. Well, baby, again, okay, the prostitution comes in, and this is why I was trying to tell people in the back, when she was having to have sex with other people, okay? It's a form of prostitution. And then you giving gifts and stuff like that. Girl, this lady need to stop it. We're almost finished, y'all. We got 3 more pages. Hung out there for extended periods of time and even went to the defendant's home when he was not there. Although the government offered general evidence through Geronda's testimony that Geronda and the defendant sometimes communicated by a cell phone, it simply failed to prove that defendant used the cell phone, persuaded, induced, or coerced Geronda into unlawful sexual activity. The government's proofs were insufficient as to Racketeering Act 5. Racketeering Act 9, Jane. In response to the defendant's claim that the government failed to prove that defendant took any action to induce, persuade, entice, or coerce Jane to travel to California between September and October 2015, the government again relies on the pitiful 1959 Fourth Circuit case Harm versus United States Supra, claiming that the inducement simply means to cause. Harms does not stand for the prostitution, a proposition the government contends. Indeed, Harms supports defendant's argument. In Harms, the question at issue was whether the government provided that proved that the defendant directed or knew that the victim would travel by common carrier. The victim had previously worked for the defendant as a prostitute, and after having a conversation with the defendant, she traveled across state lines by interstate or airline carrier and thereafter engaged in acts of prostitution in establishments maintained by the defendant. Evidence that the defendant had induced the victim to travel for the purpose of prostitution was ample. However, the defendant argued that the government's evidence was insufficient to show that the defendant either directed or knew that the victim would travel by common carrier. The Fourth Circuit concluded that it was not essential for the government to show that the defendant directed or knew that the victim would travel by interstate carrier. The court reasoned that because the government proved inducement, the fact of the resultant travel by interstate carrier was sufficient to justify a conviction under 2422. The court held it was not necessary for the government to go further and attempt to show that harms the defendant, knowingly caused the victim to travel by common carrier, either by direction or knowledge that the victim, Bruno, would use that mode of transportation. We don't talk about Bruno, no. Okay, y'all know I got kids, Lord. Cause is a word of very broad import, and its meaning is generally known. The knowing persuasion to make the interstate trip, of course, must be shown with some degree of particularity. But once the knowing persuasion has been shown, if the trip by interstate carrier follows, the offense is complete. Contrary to the government's argument, Harms does not hold that endowment or persuasion. I think she meant inducement. Yeah. Or persuasion means cause. Quite the contrary. Harms makes clear the government must show persuasion to make the trip with some degree of particularity. The court merely noted that once the government proves persuasion, it is not required to separately show that the defendant knew how the victim would travel across state lines. Here, the government did not demonstrate persuasion, inducement, or coercion. Jane offered no testimony to suggest that she was coerced or enticed into traveling to California in fall of 2015. The record shows that Jane was desperate to return to defendant after he sent her home and was eager to travel with him. It don't matter. She was underage. What aren't you comprehending, woman? This lady is ignorant. Jane's testimony about defendant's rules and sexual provocatives during this time period are not sufficient evidence of coercion to travel, even if Jane now believes, with the benefit of hindsight, that the defendant's conduct was controlling. Forced labor, racketeering acts. The government contends that Geronda's act of giving oral sex to the defendant on one occasion in January 2010 was an act of forced labor. As set forth in detail in the defendant's opening memorandum of law, the forced labor statute was not intended to punish isolated acts of abuse. But even if it was, the government did not show a nexus between the physical assault and the sexual act. Taking in its best light, the government offered evidence that on one occasion, Geronda threatened to punish. What? Okay, girl, you got a lot of errors on here, Bojangles. You people on the other side, make sure y'all tell her that. Okay, I think right here she meant to say the defendant. Anyways, offered evidence that on one occasion, Geronda threatened to punish Geronda for breaking into his home and physically assaulted her on a separate occasion because she failed to show him proper respect. Geronda did not testify that the physical assault was intended to force her to perform oral sex on defendant. Yes, she did. She did say that, ma'am. She did. After he beat her, okay, he told her, give me head. What are you talking about? This evidence falls painfully short of proof of the offense of forced labor. Geronda could have testified that she gave defendant oral sex because he threatened her or because she feared he might assault her. That's exactly What she did, ma'am. Oh my gosh, this lady is crazy. Mm, mm, mm. But those words never came out of her mouth. Random acts of violence plus a sex act does not equate to forced labor. The government should not be permitted to warp statutes beyond recognition simply because it seeks to punish isolated acts of abuse that occurred decades ago. Okay. Similarly, the government did not prove that Jane engaged in group sex acts because she was forced to. What? Jane's hindsight testimony that she did not want to participate in that conduct and is not proof that she was forced to. This lady is loony. The government cannot establish the offense of forced labor by simply showing that the defendant and Jane had a sexual relationship that some might consider abusive. The government was required to establish a casual link between the group sex acts and threats of physical violence. It failed to do so. Finally, no rational juror could conclude, based on the evidence adduced at trial, that defendant knowingly obtained or agreed to obtain any labor or services from Faith on January 13, 2018. As discussed, supra, the forced labor statute was not intended to reach isolated conduct like that described by Faith. Faith never testified that she felt forced to perform oral sex on the defendant. Yes, she did. She did. She did testify that. She did. This lady. Not wanting to have oral sex is not the same as being forced to engage in it. Furthermore, Faith admitted proudly that she was not a victim and made a choice to be involved with the defendant. Again, yeah, she did say that, because the thing is that she probably still would have been talking to the bruh if he didn't give her a freaking STD. I've said that. This ain't no surprise. She was grown. She was 19 years old. Not grown, but grown. Legal, hell. And her only discrepancy was that this ninja gave her herpes. What are we talking about here? Deflection. When she was displeased with the relationship, she walked away. The government's uh, fantasization of Faith in quest to redefine her experience as forced labor is offensive to women who actually live in conditions of servitude. Girl, stop. The harm that the forced labor statute was designed to address, for the foregoing reasons, this court must acquit the defendant of all forced labor convictions. Conclusion. For the foregoing reasons, this court should enter an order acquitting defendant of all offenses. Respectfully submitted, Bojangles. Girl, bye. Good luck with that. Good luck. Okay, girl. Good luck with that, girl. Mm-hmm. Good luck with that. Okay. Okay. All right, you guys. That completes the entire reading of what Bojangles had to say in regards to the defense, in regards to their opposition of the appeal. Okay. Now, it just came in the, oh God, what is this? Oh, okay. All right. Now, this, when I'm about to share the screen with you guys, oh goodness. Hold on, y'all. Hold on, y'all. Let me see what this is. Okay. All right. Now this is her response, y'all. This is just 7 pages. This is now I'm about to share my screen in regards to that. Okay. This is her response in regards to in regards to the new trial. Okay. So let me share my screen with you guys. So this is her response to the new trial. Okay. Sorry, y'all. I didn't see all of this. So I do apologize. Let me go ahead and get this read for y'all. Okay. Okay. As y'all see here, defendant Robert Kelly replied to the government's memorandum of law in opposition to his motion for a new trial. Defendant was denied effective assistance of counsel where his trial attorneys failed to conduct a meaningful voir dire of potential jurors and challenge unqualified jurors, some of whom had watched the inflammatory docu-series Surviving R. Kelly or were familiar with prior accusations of sexual abuse of minors against defendant. Counsel's objectively unreasonable performance during voir dire resulted in the impaling of a jury that was neither fair nor impartial in violation of defendant's due process guarantees. Now I'm gonna tell y'all this. I am gonna break this video down so you guys can hear the acquittal response as well as now this response, okay? And I'm gonna go ahead and wrap it up, okay? All right. Government of defense defends trial counsel's performance during voir dire, claiming that the defendant's complaints are vague and believed by the record. Specifically, the government vouches for counsel's performance, arguing that trial counsel actively participated in voir dire. The fact that the defense counsel participated in voir dire does not mean that his performance was objectively reasonable, where he agreed to the seating of multiple jurors who, one, had seen Surviving R. Kelly, two, were aware of defendant's reputation that he loves little girls, and were three, familiar with his prior legal troubles, including his criminal prosecution for creating sexual explicit videos with a minor. Had there been even one juror who had seen Surviving R. Kelly seated on defendant's jury, his jury could not be deemed impartial. Girl, bye. Good luck with that. Good luck with not. Good luck with finding somebody who's not seen that or who. Girl, bye. She's still this lady. This lady. This lady. Incredibly, defendant's jury was comprised of two people, jurors 3 and 5, who watched Surviving R. Kelly and numerous others who were fully aware of accusations against defendant for sexually abusing minors. Defendant contends that fully half of his jurors should have been disqualified for cause. Trial counsel did not move for any of them to be disqualified for cause and did exercise any preparatory challenges against them. The government minimizes the extraordinary prejudice that the defendant suffered when at least two seated jurors had watched Surviving R. Kelly. The government even claims that there was something strategic about trial counsel's decision to seat these jurors. The argument is nothing short of absurd. Girl, it's not, because it was more questions. That's what they said. Did you not read the government's response? I don't get it. This court need only watch the embedded sample clips of Surviving R. Kelly to conclude that no possible trial strategy existed for failing to move to disqualify juries 3 and 5 for cause. The government's efforts at constructing a trial strategy are unpersuasive. Surviving R. Kelly is a docu-series consisting of 11 episodes that graphically detail claims of sexual abuse against the defendant by numerous women. Some of the information communicated in the docu-series was presented at defendant's trial, but much of it was not. Indeed, the docu-series highlights the stories of scores of women who claim to have been victims of sexual abuse and offers no countervailing viewpoint. That's a lie. They had the little Bobby twins come on there, okay? And you had the brother talking about him too. A large part of the documentary details defendant's prior criminal case that involved allegations of sexual abuse of a 14-year-old, which included allegations that he videotaped himself urinating on the 14-year-old. It is nothing short of mind-blowing that defense counsel equates to the seating of jurors who came to the case with this highly prejudicial information that no human being could have put aside. Trial counsel's decision to set these juries in particularly troublesome where there was simply no reason to do so. Although the documentary was popular, it would not have been difficult to impanel a jury that did not include individuals who had seen the docuseries. Moreover, there is little doubt that this court would have granted defense counsel's motion for cause to disqualify any jurors who had seen the docuseries or were familiar with his prior criminal prosecution, probably with no objection from the government, had defense counsel simply asked. Defendant contends that counsel's on the record performance is objectively unreasonable, where no possible strategy exists for loading the jury on with people who were exposed to undeniably prejudicial bad act evidence, much of which would not have been admissible at trial. The extent the government contends that the defendant himself agreed to seating these juries, it is dead wrong. As set forth in the attached declaration, defendant was provided no opportunity to review the juror questionnaires prior to trial and considered himself a bystander during this critical stage of trial, which is not true. He was involved with all of that. What is he? Defendant explains that he played no meaningful role in the jury selection process and that when he attempted to assert himself and express his concerns about jurors who had watched the docuseries, the concerns were dismissed. Indeed, defendant had no idea that at least two jurors who decided his guilt had watched the documentary. Defendant declares that he did not consent to the seating of jurors who saw surviving R. Kelly or those who had knowledge about prior allegations of sexual abuse against him. The government argues that defendant cannot demonstrate prejudice because he cannot show that any juror had actual bias. The argument does not pass the Laugh test. According to the government, actual bias is bias in fact. The existence of a state of mind that leads to an inference that the person will not act with entire impartiality. This record demonstrates that before stepping into the courtroom, two jurors heard over 360 minutes of victim testimonies, including graphic accounts of urinating on 14-year-olds. If this type of information does not lead to inference that a person will not and cannot act with impartiality, it is difficult to imagine what would a whopping 6 juries were familiar with allegations that defendant had previously sexually abused minors and had faced legal consequences for such conduct. The government attempts to trivialize the prejudice to defendant, but it is simply beyond debate that defendant's jurors suffered from actual bias. Frankly, even if defendant cannot show actual bias, bias should be presumed here. The United States Supreme Court has observed a fair trial in a fair tribunal is a basic requirement of due process fairness of course, requires an absence of actual bias in the trial of cases. But our system of law has always endeavored to prevent even the probability of unfairness. To perform its to perform its highest function in the best way, justice must satisfy the appearance of justice. In this particular case, law, as you guys see, and it is presented right here, and you can read on your own time. Okay. Indeed, the United States Supreme Court has struck down convictions irrespectful of a showing of actual bias, where prejudice is inherent in those convictions, as case law as you see here. This is a case where prejudice is inherent in defendant's convictions because fully half of his jury was exposed to highly prejudicial and inadmissible evidence that invariably interfered with defendants' cherished constitutional safeguards. In the old but highly instructive case of this particular case law, Marshall in the United States, the United States Supreme Court reversed a defendant's drug conviction after concluding that exposure of some of the jurors to newspaper articles was so prejudicial. Girl, this was 1959. Girl, 1959, sis. I'm tired, but girl, bye. The United States Supreme Court reversed a defendant's drug conviction after concluding that exposure of some of the jurors to hold on, y'all, I gotta take a look. Defendant's drug conviction after concluding that exposure of some of the jurors to newspaper articles was so prejudicial to justify a a new trial. During the defendant's trial, two newspaper articles got before a substantial number of jurors. Sorry, y'all. And the news accounts contained information that the defendant had two previous felony convictions and detailed the circumstances of prior arrests and convictions. Upon learning that the news accounts had reached the jurors, the trial judge questioned the juries about whether they had seen the articles. 7 of the jurors had some exposure to the articles, but all assured the trial judge that they would not be influenced by the news articles and could decide the case on the evidence in the record. The trial judge denied the defendant's motion for a mistrial, finding that there was no prejudice to the defendant. The United States Supreme Court reversed findings. We have here the exposure of jurors to information of a character which the trial judge ruled was such prejudicial it could not be directly offered as evidence. The prejudice to the defendant is almost certain to be as great when that evidence reaches the jury through news accounts as when it is part of the prosecution's evidence. It may indeed be greater, for it is then not tempered by protective procedures. Consistent with the teachings of Marshall, y'all, we are going to be on the last page here. Defendant is entitled to a new trial. Half of his jurors were exposed to information of a character that was so prejudicial that it could not be offered into evidence. Indeed, had trial counsel simply moved to disqualify these jurors, it seems likely that those motions for cause would have been allowed. Prejudice to the defendant must be presumed given the inflammatory nature of the information that no average human aside, could not put aside. Defendant's conviction must be vacated and a new trial ordered. Good luck with that. This is the last page, y'all. Defendant is entitled to a new trial where one of his trial attorneys labored under a disabling conflict of interest as a result of her uh, simultaneous representation of the defendant and the government star witness chain that was imputed to the entire defense team. Oh, I want to hear what you guys say about this. Defendant rests largely on his arguments contained in his opening memorandum of law. Defendant was denied his constitutional guarantee of conflict-free counsel when his attorney labored under under a conflict of interest based on her simultaneous representation of defendant and government witness. Jane trial counsel further suffered from a Fulton conflict. Neither of these conflicts were waivable. In light of foregoing, defendant's conviction must be vacated and a new trial ordered. Girl, so you just this last part, she just copied and paste. Wasn't that the going around on these YouTube streets? Oh, the government just copied and paste. Well, there you have it, folks. She basically just repeated what she put in her last documents. No different. Anyways, folks, like seriously, there you have it. You guys heard both the response to the government from Moan Jeans in its entirety with her motion for the acquittal, as well as the new trial. Now, you guys, if I'm not mistaken, it's literally in the hands of the judge. It's literally now in the hands of Judge Donnelly at this point, in which what she decides to do with this information. I don't think that it's going to be another opportunity for the government to respond. If that changes, upon her, Judge Donnelly going into this docket and stating that she received it, because that's what Judge Donnelly do. She'll say, the court has received it, and she'll say, uh, government has this day to respond. So like I tell you guys, knowing Judge Donnelly, will hear something. It's 11:52 p.m. Central Standard Time here in Texas. We'll hear something on tomorrow, and that's period. Without a shadow of doubt, we'll hear something on tomorrow from Judge Donnelly, be it her saying that she received it, and then the government has XYZ to respond. But if I recall, it doesn't give any further dates. It was like the 4th. If it didn't say any other further days. However, again, the government has until the 7th to respond to the government's requesting them not to push off the sentencing. Okay, so we're waiting for that. And with Bonjean's history, and with her being booked and busy, it probably will be all the way up until the 7th when we'll hear a response, which is Thursday. Okay. So by Thursday, Bojangles has to respond to the government saying, hell no, we not trying to wait any longer to get this man sentenced. Okay. So that is it, folks. I pray that I got the information out there. I know I was stumbling and fumbling over a few things. I pray that you guys are able to read back on everything if you wasn't able to gather it up from me, okay? Not for nothing, you guys. I love y'all so very much, and thank y'all for hanging in there in the long run. I'm not fixing to get into the chat. I love y'all so very much, but I'm gonna go ahead and get out of here, okay? Before I do, I would like to let you guys know that I am conducting a fashion show here in hey Tavier, hey baby, Here in the state of Texas, Dallas, Texas to be specific, if you are able to get here, make sure that you're in attendance here, okay? All right, you guys, I will see y'all tomorrow. This is
So, Whitney Davis, or should I say, the Whitney Davis. What you got to say about that?
this is real.
Know that they ride or die. I keep boys by my side. Know that they ride or die. I keep boys by my side.
Day we hustle, but the night we
Know that they ride or die. Know that they ride or die. I keep boys by my side. Know that they ride or die. I keep boys by my side.
What you're talking about? Why are you guys keeping me?
Know that they ride or die. My name came
down
up
in
with
history.
sounds. More when I was not around. Certain people that I know, they ain't no longer about. My name came up a lot of sounds. More when I was not around. Certain people that I know, they ain't no longer about. My name came up a lot of sounds.
Y'all killing me with this. I can't help fucking here. I'm
Robert.
I'm fucking real. You're killing me, man. This ain't not about music. I'm trying to have a relationship with my kids, and I can't do it. Y'all just don't want to believe the truth. You don't want to believe it.
At this point, we briefly pause the interview to give Kelly a moment.
Man, y'all killing me with this. Y'all killing me with this. Y'all killing me with this. Y'all killing me. Y'all trying to kill me. Y'all killing me with this. Y'all killing me with this. Y'all killing me with this. Y'all killing me with killing me, man. Trying to kill me. Killing me, man. Trying to kill me. You don't want to believe it. Trying to kill me. Killing me, man. Trying to kill me. I hope this camera keep going. Stupid R.KELLY. Fight for my life. Stupid R.KELLY. Do it. Stupid R.KELLY. Fight for my life. Stupid R.KELLY. Do it. 30 years.
I'm Whitney. Keep it cute or get the boot.